Welcome back, everyone. SimplyTrade tips. We're back with another tip here. We'll try to be short and sweet. We do these tips as we do our courses here at Global Trading Center. We realize there's just so much information, so much different places that you can go try to get like read about the regulations or just in general, just there's just so much out there. And so we thought maybe we ought to put together an episode on CBP resources. And instead of hearing about CBP, the common thought is like CBP is kind of like dentist, right? Oh my gosh, they're going to go and pull out my teeth. It's going to hurt. And, whatever. Let's think about CBP not only as the enforcer or the auditor, and all the bad, ugly stuff that we hear, about CBP. And it's really not ugly or bad. I mean, they're just an agency. They're trying to regulate trade and making things flow better. And unfortunately for everybody and some bad players are out there, they do need to enforce those regulations. We do have Denise here with us, one of our instructors here at Global Training Center, who's also, like I said before, she's also an SME, a subject matter expert with us. And when we're talking about CBP, there's another side to CBP, like when we were talking off camera. Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, as you were saying, when people think about CBP, they consider them kind of a negative burden, you can say, but that is only like half the story. There can be advantages to utilizing CBP, and CBP also gives you tools. It gives you real practical resources that can help you to get things right the first time and to avoid surprises and actually protect your business. So they publish a lot of information designed to help you comply with the law. And these are what we would call CBP type of resources.
But okay, so now let's dig in a little bit more into those resources, Denise. What are the main tools or the materials that you can get or that you can, obtain from CBP?
Where there are three big ones to keep in mind for today's episode. So binding rulings, informed compliance publications, and then the broader reasonable care, informed compliance type of materials. So these resources apply to all companies alike. Smaller and medium-sized companies actually may benefit more, actually, as they are more than likely don't have the resources to get different additional information from experts such as lawyers itself.
So that's a very good point that you make there, because when we go through our trainings with our clients, we always sometimes we'll get a question about, does my product this, and here's the scenario X, Y, and Z, and we go through the different information, and I know a very common answer for us. It's always the binding rulings. Check your binding rulings. You talked about small businesses and everything. You can benefit from those binding rulings. Can we talk a little bit more about that, about binding rulings?
Sure. So a binding ruling is a formal written decision that's issued by customs that answers a specific question about your imports. So usually that question is about how your product should be classified under the HTS, what is country of origin for customs purposes, or what marking requirements apply. So those are kind of the three that people typically use the binding rulings for. Uh, Importers, exporters, producers, and their authorized agents can all request these type of rulings before goods are imported. So once customs issues the ruling, it's binding on customs as long as the facts you provided are accurate and that the law does not change. So it can typically take about 30 days to get a response, though depending on how complicated a request is, it may go to headquarters for a ruling and then take much longer. That I had one ruling before that I put in, and it was a little bit complicated. So it got shipped off to headquarters, and it actually took like a year to come back. But that's not the typical thing that happens. Usually it's about 30 days. You can kind of think of a binding ruling as your compliance insurance policy, you can say.
So okay, but your binding ruling is your compliance insurance policy. So that is like, I guess let's dig more into that. Well, why would it be an insurance policy? Like why do you why is it that secure for you, when you are importing?
So when I call it a compliance insurance policy, I'm really just talking about the actual binding loan itself. You make a small upfront investment, gathering all of the technical details, maybe samples or drawings, and then you're submitting a very strong request. And then in return, you get a decision you can rely on shipment after shipment. So that binding ruling gives you predictability because you know your classification and duty rates before you price or launch. You have risk reduction because it demonstrates reasonable care and gives you something concrete to point to if customs ever questions you. And then also operational efficiency because you're not re-arguing the same classifications across brokers, ports, or teams. So it becomes a single source of truth that everyone can align to, which is why it really does function like a compliance insurance policy, you can say.
Okay, so now let's also go into that aspect, because as I said earlier, when we do have trainings, we get all sides of the spectrum of importers, from the very small mom and pops to the huge corporations that are importing, that attend our trainings. And of course, the bigger companies have the attorneys and the resources and all that to file a binding ruling. On the lower end and the smaller importers, maybe even you might even be a bigger importer, but it's like about one of the first times that you're going to be importing. And let's say you're not ready to file your own ruling. We always tell them, hey, refer to the database that CBP has. Why is that important? Why would we want them to look at a database of somebody else's rulings?
Well, CBP also publishes those rulings in an online database, often called CROSS, which stands for Customs Ruling Online Search System. So that means even if you don't request your own ruling, you can still read how CBP has analyzed similar products and issues in the past. So it's an excellent resource. Now, keep in mind, this should only be used as a guide. It's not really considered binding unless it's your actual binding ruling for a product.
Interesting. You also mentioned informed compliance publications. Usually, when we do talk about those, and we have folks that may know about them, or when that may have that understand those, and usually they'll like say that some of these look pretty old. They just seem like archives more than anything. Like, why would an importer even bother or look at these?
Well, ICPs are booklets that Customs publishes on specific topics, things like footwear classification, textile rules, customs valuation, record keeping, reasonable care, and much, much more. They grew out of Customs informed compliance and shared responsibility model. Basically, Customs' way of saying we expect you to take compliance seriously, and here are materials to help you do that. So ICPs may look dated, that's true, but they're still highly relevant because they capture how CBP thinks about compliance at the foundational type of level. So they do a great job of breaking down core concepts like classification, valuation, and reasonable care in a clear, structured type of way. So while they may not necessarily reflect every recent regulatory change, the underlying principles haven't shifted nearly as much. So they remain valuable as both a reference and also a teaching tool. So many teams still use them to train staff and to build a common understanding across functions. The key is to treat the ICPs as a starting point, and it's like a solid groundwork that you then supplement with current regulations and then guidance to stay fully compliant.
And it's a very good point that you made there, Denise, because we do also commonly say that and try to tell our clients you need to build a good foundation, of understanding the compliance, the regulations or the rules. Once you build that foundation, anything they throw at you new, like we've had these last 12 and a half months or so, 12 plus months
More.
since the new Trump administration, they start throwing at us all these new IEPA tariffs and any reciprocal tariffs, any, like the 232s, 301s. Once they start throwing that at us, if you look at the foundation, you tend to understand how to apply those because you already know how a regular importation or like how to classify, et cetera. So we always do that. Uh, we try to have our clients understand that they'll get it if they do have a strong foundation. But moving beyond that, or similar to that, let's just talk about like in like real life here. Let's just talk about a scenario of like if somebody is getting ready to import a new product, be it a textile, electronics, plastic components, doesn't matter. How would you use those resources? Like what would be a normal process or framework for you to use those resources from CBP?
Okay, so let's do it. Okay, so step one, you go to CBP's Informed Compliance publications and then find anything relevant, maybe publications or classifications of the textiles on electronics or on valuation if there are any assists or special pricing. You read those to get a sense of the concept and the issues that customs focuses on. And then for step two, you prepare your internal analysis. You look at the product's material, its principal function, and you draft your best classification and origin determination based on the general rules of interpretation, which is could be another topic, as well as the chapter notes and legal text within the harmonized tariff schedule. Step three, if there's serious duty impact or real ambiguity, then you file the binding ruling request. So you can include detailed descriptions, product specs, maybe even photos or diagrams. So once that ruling comes back, you don't file it away. You feed that information into your product's master data, your ERP systems, your broker instructions, as well as your internal SOPs, standard operating procedures. So your whole process then runs on a solid, customs validated foundation.
Exactly. So I guess throughout our conversation and even throughout our trainings, this word gets thrown out a lot. Reasonable care. It gets used a lot. And so, how exactly does that look in practice? And in using those CBP resources to make sure that you do have that reasonable care.
Yeah, well, reasonable care is the basis for all things compliance and customs. Once you think about customs, you got to think about reasonable care. So, in practice, reasonable care means being able to show how and why you made your compliance decisions using customs zone guidance as your foundation. So, when you work with resources like ICPs as well as reasonable care checklists, you're asking questions like, are we documenting our classifications, verifying supplier information, and maintaining proper records? And just as importantly, can we prove it? So that's the main thing, is being able to prove that your classifications were done with due diligence, you can say. So many teams use these materials as internal audit tool to identify gaps, then strengthen their processes through better documentation, training, or data control. So the key is not just doing the work, but documenting that your approach is grounded in CBP guidance and where applicable rulings. So if you're ever questioned, you can clearly demonstrate that you took reasonable care seriously.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Also, side note here, Denise, let's jump to page 9 where it's operationally how does using CBP resources make life easier for brokers, logistics teams, et cetera. So let's jump to that. And then that way we can wrap up
Yep.
in a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So, Denise, now, so operationally, how do these resources make life easier for, let's say, brokers, logistics teams, internal teams within an organization?
Well, clear customs positions means fewer delays at the border due to classification disputes or questions about origin. Your broker has clear instructions, and your internal teams aren't really scrambling to re explain your logic for every shipment.
So, does that, like from a legal or compliance standpoint, how does it strengthen the company's reasonable care story? Like in other words, strategically, like can it influence your sourcing, your product design, your contract decisions? You know that kind. I mean, like all put together. You know how is that helping within your organization?
So, from a legal and compliance standpoint, this strengthens your reasonable care story by showing that your decisions are actually grounded in CBP's own guidance, not just guesswork. When you rely on tools like the informed compliance publications, reasonable care checklist, as well as the binding rulings, you're building a documented, defensible record that holds up in an audit, a focus assessment, or entry review. Strategically, it also lets you get ahead of customs impact instead of reacting to it. You can factor classification, duty rates, origin considerations into sourcing decisions, product design, and contract negotiations early on. So over that time, that shifts the mindset from seeing CBP as a black box to treating it as rule-based system you can play around to manage risk and to support the business.
And we always recommend or tell our listeners that if you're in trade compliance and you need to go talk to your executives about just what you do and how you do it and why you need support or help from them. Don't give them the 30-page PowerPoint presentation. It's just like, in other words, just break it down. Let's make it simple so they can understand. And so what's the impact? So in keeping with that logic or reasoning, so what is like the simple leadership level messaging that we want to have here for with regards to everything we've discussed today?
So if we're importing into the United States and we're not using customs own resources, binding rulings that inform compliance publications and etc., we're choosing to fly blind. The information is public, it's free, and it's designed to help us to get it right the first time. So why not use it?
So let's wrap this up then, and let's go now to our common or most typical user here, which is the trade professional, the importer, the exporter. Those kind of folks that listen to our episode. What is the in the last episode we ended with a one action item. Let's do that here as well. What is the one action or one thing that you would like for them to get out of all of this that we just talked about today?
Well, I would say to go and download a few informed compliance publications that relate to your products, explore the ruling database, and then also think about where a binding ruling might give you a real peace of mind. So think of these resources as your navigation system. CBP still enforces those rules, but it also gives you a map so you're not guessing where that road is.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Thank you. That's a good takeaway. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll continue with our series here next week. We have a couple, I mean, not couple, but we do have a couple of episodes left, but we will explore other different areas of trade. And for now, well, thank you so much, Denise. Thanks for putting all this together and making this informative for our listening audience.
I appreciate it and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all. Have a good day.